Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon and welcome to the NTU Decarbonisation Forum. I'm Karen.
And I'm Vinit.
And we'll be your MCs for today. Today's event is nearly the end of what has been an amazing collaborative process over the past 3 months. We gathered a diverse set of stakeholders to discuss how to accelerate the pace of decarbonization in ASEAN for 2 important industries, buildings and textiles and apparel. We split into working groups that met 5 times to identify known solutions that help reduce emissions, to discuss the obstacles that prevent companies from doing more, and finally, to generate recommendations for how stakeholders can help overcome these obstacles.
When we say nearly the end of the process, it's because next month we'll be publishing a full account of the working group's findings in the form of playbooks. So do keep a lookout for that. One for each of these industries. Today, we are excited to share with you some of the most impactful ideas from these playbooks. And here's the agenda for the remainder of this afternoon.
After the welcome and opening remarks, we will move to our keynote address by Prof. Adam Switzer. The first panel discussion on buildings follows the keynote speech, after which we will have a short tea break. Following the tea break, we have our remaining 2 panels, one on our second industry, textile and apparel, and a final panel discussing financial innovations that could help mobilize the considerable capital required to address carbon emissions in ASEAN. Finally, the event concludes with closing remarks from the Dean of the Business School. Now that you know where we're going, it's our pleasure to introduce Prof. Simba Chang, Director of the Center for Sustainable Finance Innovation.
Prof. Simba, please.
Very good afternoon to everyone. My job is to thank everybody before we start everything. So I need this piece of paper to make sure that no one is left out. So we first thank you all for joining us at this inaugural NTU Decarbonisation Forum. So my name is Sim Chang. I also have a nickname, Simba, which I took from the movie The Lion King. At Nanyang Business School, I'm a professor of finance, also the associate dean for research, and also the director of this Center for Sustainable Finance Innovation, or CSFI for short. Today we will talk about decarbonization, which is imperative for combating climate change and securing a viable future for humanity. So given its importance, I really want to thank maybe around more than 50 industry leaders joining the working group discussions in the past few months, making great contributions to our decarbonization initiative. I also want to thank our generous sponsors. I don't know whether you can see them here. Maybe not. They were partners, Earth Observatory Singapore and London Stock Exchange Group. We are truly grateful for their partnership, sponsorship, and strong belief in our vision as well. A special thank you goes to my fellow center co-directors, Professor Matthew Durst and Professor Cindy Deng, sitting somewhere, okay, for actually their vision in initiating this forum and for their outstanding dedications and commitment to decarbonization and sustainable finance in general. I also want to extend my sincere gratitude to the whole organizing committee led by Matt, along with all the team members who work tirelessly behind the scenes. So without their, again, dedication and hard work, this forum can never become a reality. So without further ado, I'm very happy to invite NTU's Vice President for Lifelong Learning Alumni Engagement, Professor Bo Wai Fong, to give an opening address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simba. It's my great pleasure to be here. A very warm welcome and good afternoon to our industry partners, colleagues and students. Welcome to the inaugural NTU Decarbonisation Forum. So this forum is actually organized by Nanyang Business School and the Center for Sustainable Finance Innovation. Very glad to see the center being so active and bring in such good industry leaders for this Decarbonisation Forum. So in today's forum, we're discussing a very timely topic that has very far-reaching effects. The topic is on decarbonisation, which, as we all know, is a process for reducing carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions, which is very central in our battle against climate change. As we all know, this battle is not really just at the environmental level, but we all need to put in and play our parts at a collective level because reducing the carbon footprint really requires very comprehensive change across multiple sectors. This will include transforming how we produce, how we consume our energy, as well as how we build infrastructure and how we innovate in technology. And we're very glad to see a very diverse group of stakeholders here, including the industry leaders, investors, and regulators. Your support is really very crucial to making changes happen. And your perspectives will be very valuable today to enrich our discussions, and we expect you will be providing a lot of meaningful insights into what decarbonisation actually looks like in practice. So this forum will be focusing on two key industries as mentioned by the MCs. First is in the buildings industry. This sector is really a cornerstone of development across ASEAN, and Singapore is very proud to be at the forefront of innovation in this field. So we have numerous local firms as well as organizations that are actually leading the way in lower carbon solutions. We expect our forum participants today will be exploring sustainable design, materials, engineering, construction, as well as facilities management in the building sector. Another very interesting sector I think we'll be talking about today is the textiles and apparel. This is a less homogeneous and less standardized sector, but we also have a lot of companies that are headquartered in Singapore, but their emissions actually come from production that are scattered across multiple countries, particularly those with more cost-competitive labor. Forum discussions today, we expect, will be covering how to enhance sustainability in garment manufacturing as well as fabric mills. So throughout the day, you will have a chance to learn about the practical playbooks that were being developed by our industry working groups specifically for this forum. And I know they've really put in a lot of hard work and effort in this. These playbooks are designed to provide actionable steps. These include the operational enhancements, the innovative financing mechanisms, as well as the regulatory support that can enable the ASEAN firms to actually reduce emissions. They reflect the hours of dedicated dialogue and collaboration that essentially highlights the very critical support that we will actually need from various stakeholders to very effectively implement the change and reduce emissions. So our commitment to decarbonisation really marks a major shift in how we think about economic growth as well as caring for the environment. So as leaders in technology, business, and education, NTU as well as NBS hopes to combine the strengths of our various disciplines to drive innovative, practical, and climate-conscious solutions. That's why you see today is the collaborative effort of multiple parties in NTU, including the Business School, including representatives from Earth Observatory, as well as CSFI. So CSFI, in particular, exemplifies this approach in financial innovation and sustainable finance. Ultimately, we believe that doing well means doing good, right? Which is why we are getting the word out, making connections, and also hopefully creating a community around this goal. So in closing, we really hope that the NTU Decarbonisation Forum will be the launch of a new platform for ideas, strategies, and collaborations in our journey towards decarbonisation and also to see sustainability practices adopted across all sectors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Bo. Today, we share a common goal to engage with a diverse group of stakeholders, including industry leaders, investors, and regulators, to learn how to accelerate the pace of decarbonization in key industries throughout the region. Why is this so important? To tell us more about the science and how critical it is that we set up the pace of our efforts, let's welcome Prof. Adam Switzer from NTU's Asian School of the Environment to share a keynote speech with us. Prof. Switzer, please.
There's a clicker. I believe I need that. Okay, I'm going to stand a little bit back. Some of you probably realized I was wearing a mask 1 minute ago. Now I'm not wearing a mask, so I'm going to stand back a little bit and speak a little louder, so hopefully you can hear me. I'm really not feeling very well, so I'm sorry if I'm a little bit under par today. Firstly, a big thank you to our sponsors, the Earth Observatory of Singapore. I was one of the founding members of the Earth Observatory of Singapore. I moved here 15 years ago when it started, and it's a great pleasure to come down to this end of the campus and to talk to you today a little bit about climate change, but also talk about decarbonization. And I'm going to start with the absolute basics. I'm going to do a little bit of science along the way because I am from the College of Science, and then we'll touch a little bit on the industries. And so a big thank you to the Earth Observatory of Singapore and the London Stock Exchange Group for their support of the event. It's great to be here. As you can see, I have a variety of roles in the university. I like to keep busy. I'm trying to drop a few of these, so hopefully that list will go away soon. Decarbonization. If you take it at its root term, right, we're talking about carbon, okay? And when you think about decarbonization, you go and look it up, you get definitions like to reduce the levels of carbon emissions, such as carbon dioxide caused by involvement in something such as facility, process, or organization. It's a very basic definition, but it's not really decarbonization. There's a lot more to carbon than just what we want to remove from our atmosphere and from our processes. And so I actually don't like the term decarbonization. It shouldn't have anything against carbon. You're made of carbon. Most of the things in this room are made of carbon in some way. We shouldn't get rid of all carbon. What we're talking about is a fundamental issue, a particular carbon dioxide group of molecules and gases that we want to remove from the atmosphere. That's what we're talking about when we talk about decarbonization. And I'm smiling at Matthew down here because I remember the email that I got when I was asked to come and give this speech was for me to go hard and really hammer home the message of the importance of climate change. So I'm going to do that before I pass out. So what is it about this carbon? Why do we need to get rid of it? Well, we need to understand the Earth's carbon cycle. It's a very complicated system. It has a huge natural variability. It involves removing carbon from many parts of our Earth, from our deep Earth, from the ecosystems, from our plants, from our organisms, into the atmosphere, through the oceans. It's a very complicated web of transport of carbon throughout the Earth system, but it's a balanced budget. Well, it was a reasonably well-balanced budget. But what we've done is we've started human emissions, and you can see the numbers there. The yellows are natural fluxes, the reds are human contributions, and the white is our stored carbon. We have the ability to store carbon, we have the ability to remove carbon, we have the ability to create carbon. What we're creating is a score of about 9 out of this total. And you can see it's not a huge amount of carbon that we're creating if you think about the whole carbon cycle, but it's a very important part. And so one of the things I'm going to address in just a moment is exactly why carbon in our atmosphere is important. Because often I'll give a talk like this, a fairly generalist talk, and after the talk, someone will come up to me and say, exactly how does carbon dioxide warm our atmosphere? So please indulge me for a moment, because in a moment we're going to have a little bit of a chemistry lesson, followed by a short physics lesson to really pay homage to my home college, the College of Science, because I think it's an important thing to consider. But to understand this carbon cycle, we have to understand the fluxes and how they change through time. And they're spatially and chronologically disparate in terms of we have long-term processes like the burial of carbon in natural systems that take hundreds of thousands of years at times, up to millions of years. And we have very short-term processes like the interaction between the ocean and the atmosphere and the sequestering of carbon dioxide into our oceans. And so we have to understand the dynamics of this very complicated system, and that's why understanding climate is quite a complicated topic at the best of times. But if we think about the carbon budget 2023, I want you to focus on the orange bit, right? Atmospheric CO2 growth rate. We continue through fossil fuel use, through land use change, and through changes in the way that we use our environments to produce huge amounts of carbon. So total emissions at 40 plus, okay? And we're talking, and then atmospheric growth rate of 16.9. We are still continuing to produce more and more carbon dioxide and more carbon that is going into our atmosphere. And we have to stop. And that's the key to decarbonization. Now, the next thing is understanding what exactly is happening in our atmosphere. Our atmosphere is amazing. It's a very thin envelope of gases. And it's something we've been studying for hundreds and hundreds of years. There's no newness to this science of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I put a few key points in here. I want you to look at the dates, okay? Discovering that gases can trap heat, 1856, okay? Testing the heat trapping ability of gases by John Tyndall, found nitrogen and oxygen have no ability to trap heat. Everyone went, oh, okay. But carbon dioxide, ozone and water vapor, key elements of our atmosphere, have the ability to trap heat. 1859, we worked this out. Well, we didn't. Tyndall did. Importantly, and somewhat ironically, Tyndall was concerned that if the amount of these gases dropped in the atmosphere, the Earth would start to cool. Now, our view is very different. And then in 1896, a Swedish chemist, Arrhenius, connected coal, carbon dioxide, and climate. In 1896. This is not new science. There's nothing new about the science of climate change. There's nothing new about our understanding of heating the atmosphere. But we continue to do it. And so this is where I'm starting to go hard. Is that okay, Matthew? We haven't been listening since the 1800s. We've started to listen recently in the last couple of years. And it's a real testament to much of the dedication of climate scientists since the 1800s that they're still out there trying to get people to listen. Because weaker people would have probably given up by now. The next question I'm asked, exactly how does it work? Okay, so remember the early foundations were that some of the gases in the atmosphere, including nitrogen, which makes up most of our atmosphere, don't heat, don't collect radiation, don't heat. How does carbon dioxide do it? Because the carbon dioxide molecule, one carbon, two oxygens, okay? It has the ability to vibrate. And when it does, it collects that heat, okay? So for N2 and O2, the heat goes straight past, the radiated heat goes straight past. But for CO2 molecules, it absorbs infrared radiation and it starts to vibrate. And that causes heat. And it causes the heat atmosphere around it to heat up. So every molecule of CO2 that gets hit by infrared radiation starts to heat up. So the more CO2 we put in the atmosphere, the more we start to heat the atmosphere. Now, when we said that nitrogen and oxygen don't really heat up, that wasn't really true. That was the understanding in the 1800s. But now we're going to move from chemistry, because after we've heated these CO2 molecules, we've excited the CO2 molecules, those CO2 molecules absorb photons, they get in an energized state, and that energized state starts to energize the cold N2 and O2 molecules. And so we have a physical knock-on effect. So now cold layers are now warmer in our atmosphere as well. And so when we think about it, we've got both chemistry and physics happening. Our carbon dioxide is absorbing that infrared radiation, starting to absorb that heat, getting excited, and releasing that energy in terms of heat that then heats the other molecules around it in the atmosphere. What does that mean at the end of the day? It means that we are rapidly increasing the heat of our atmosphere throughout the whole profile of the atmosphere. And much of this is occurring in the lower atmosphere. Now, the next thing is cause and effect, okay? I know why I'm feeling sick today. There's a cause and effect. My kids went back to school last week, collected some diseases, brought them home, and made me and my wife sick. There's very clear cause and effect. Carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, we add carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we heat the atmosphere. How do we know that the atmosphere is heating? Because we measure it. We've been measuring temperatures for hundreds and hundreds of years. So this diagram here, we're talking about a baseline, and I like this diagram here from our friends at Columbia because it shows you very clearly just how much we've heated the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. And the baseline here is 1880 to 1920. There's a common diagram that's shown around the world that starts in the 1950s. We need our baseline back in 1880 to 1920 because this is before the start of the Industrial Revolution. And there's a very clear correlation with our warming atmosphere. And we've warmed the atmosphere already compared to around 1900. In just over 100 years, we've warmed the atmosphere more than 1.2 degrees. We're getting very close to 1.5 degrees. And those of you that are familiar with the Paris Agreement would be to try and limit to 1.5 degrees. We're rapidly heading off there. And the scariest part of that, this very recent plot, this is, I think, till August 9th, is look at the trajectory at the top right-hand side of the plot. This year is likely to be warmer than last year, and last year was the warmest on record. So we're still going in this direction. And if we look at the projections, I know people down in the business school love a good projection. So here we are. If we look at the projections, no matter how we plot this, our projection is for increased temperatures. So what does that mean? I'll come to that in just a minute. But no matter how we look at this, if we don't do something about this, we're going to be looking at least 1.5 degrees of warming relative to 1900s. And so we do have to move forward. It's case closed on this. There should not be a climate debate anymore. We've been measuring CO2 in the atmosphere. It's correlated with temperature. We've known that since the late 1800s. Any scientist that tells you that climate change is not real is a fraud. Is that hard enough, Matt? Any scientist who claims CO2 doesn't warm the atmosphere is wrong. We've known that for years. What we need to work on now is reducing our carbon dioxide emissions. We need to work on the other greenhouse gases as well, but we have to work on decarbonizing. And so that's why we're here today. And I like this image from Nomura. I don't know if anyone from Nomura is here, but I like this image from Nomura, so I lifted it with credit. The description of this challenge here, the largest peacetime transformation of the world economy. For anyone in business, you can't be left behind in the decarbonization program. It's fundamental to the future of every sector. And we'll talk a little bit about the sectors. The steel industry, the cement industry, the chemical industry, these ones have made pretty big steps already, and I'll cover a few of them already in a couple of minutes. But one of the things I always try to do when I teach climate change at the other end of campus to our undergraduate students in their first year is deliver a message that doesn't scare them, that gives them hope. And there is real hope here, because the technological process, the policy incentives that have come in the last decade, the huge movement towards decarbonization is evidence that there is real hope to this. And there's opportunities for business. And those of you that have been in my class, I think there's a couple of you here, will know that I quote somebody, but I don't say who it is. But it's a very prominent person in business in Singapore that said to me just over 12 years ago, Adam, rest assured that Singapore government and Singapore business sector will move very quickly on climate change as soon as we work out how to make money out of it. And you can probably work out who that would have said that. It's true. The reason that people like me come out of our College of Science down to a business school to talk to you about decarbonisation and talk to you about climate change is because there is real opportunity. There's opportunity to make money from climate change. And there's opportunity to make money from decarbonisation. And there's opportunity to make money from teaching other people how to do it better. And so this is a key diagram. I like this diagram because it does touch on all of those things that we need: technology, policy, and investment. And as the money flows in, things will start changing much more rapidly. Another thing we need to discuss is the idea of carbon neutral and net zero. You cannot open a news article page, not just an individual one, any news agency, and not find an article about net zero or carbon neutrality. And they're often used interchangeably, and they shouldn't. So Matt, I'm going to go hard again. If you're in the industry, please don't do this. Okay, they are two different things. Carbon neutrality, okay, the carbon neutral entity, CO2 emissions are accounted for and coupled with attempts to reduce those emissions, okay, by compensating or reducing emissions elsewhere, okay? That is carbon neutral. Net zero, on the other hand, means that our company reduces the absolute emissions across its whole supply chain, okay? The big difference. So one thing I'm asking you as industry people to do, think about which one you're focusing on. Carbon neutrality or net zero? Because there's a lot of businesses out there saying, we want to be net zero by 2050. Read those definitions. They're very different. If you want to be net zero by 2050, you really better put your foot down. If you want to be carbon neutral, you just need to put your thinking cap on. So they require different efforts. If we think about our emissions, a good financial crisis helps a little. I'm not saying we need another recession, but a good financial crisis helps the emissions numbers. A pandemic definitely helps the emission numbers, but in a very short term. Again, we are still on this huge trajectory towards increasing emissions. But I read a report recently that China may have peaked its emissions. Other countries are clearly on the way down. I find it really interesting. If you want some homework, go home and look at the latest US emissions data. The US emissions data is on a significant, steep decline, which is interesting given what's going on in the election cycle. For the US to commit to 10% reduction in emissions by 2030 is nothing, because they're already halfway there. And so we need to work globally to address these issues. Now let me think about ASEAN. Let me zoom in a little bit. Matt asked me to zoom in a little bit on ASEAN. The impacts in ASEAN include things like rising sea levels. And that rising sea level may be melting ice sheets and warming our atmosphere, but much of our land in Southeast Asia, particularly in the developing countries of Southeast Asia, is sinking, our coastal land, which has a high concentration of our economic efforts because it's close to ports and close to transport. And so sea level rise is a particular issue. In Singapore, the former Prime Minister stated that we're going to spend up to $100 billion defending Singapore against sea level rise. $100 billion just for this little island. Imagine the cost of defending against sea level rise in places with much longer and more diverse coasts. Increases in the frequency of extreme weather, rainfall events, flood events. Some of you may remember the Thai floods of 2011 had huge disruptions to supply chains globally. How often are we going to get these floods and our rainfall patterns, are they going to change? And to do this, we need underlying data. And one of the things that the Earth Observatory of Singapore started to do immediately when we started was to push for the collection of more data, because it's the data that drives the models. If you look at climate model outputs for rainfall for Western Borneo, which is where the new Indonesian capital are, by 2100, it's going to be 20% drier or 20% wetter, because there's no underlying data. So we have to invest in data, and we have to invest in better projections. We don't really know what the future of rainfall is. And we at the Earth Observatory of Singapore, we're leading a program called the Climate Transformation Program. And one of the focus areas of that is to try and understand the future of extreme hazards and also feed into business models with our partners here in the business school. And Prof. Simba is one of our PIs. Changes to agricultural productivity. What are you going to do if you can't get rice from southern Vietnam anymore because it's all flooded by seawater? How's it going to affect agriculture? And water scarcity. We're already seeing this. We're seeing this in Taiwan right now. In Taiwan right now, they're taking water away from the agricultural industry to feed the semiconductor plants. So what's going to happen if water becomes more scarce? If we think about Singapore, the last big drought in Singapore was in the 1770s. Again, we have very little data. And so we talk about water scarcity, we talk about biodiversity loss, and then we have a big program in the Climate Transformation Program on climate impacts on health. What's going to happen in terms of health? People with outdoor workers, with extreme heat. The Singapore V3 model already says that Singapore is going to experience 15 to 20% more extreme hot days by 2075. What does that mean? If you have outdoor workers in your industry, then they're going to be put under extreme heat stress. It may come to the part where you have to stop work during the middle of the day, affecting business productivity. So health impacts, including vector-borne diseases as well. I got really angry a couple of weeks ago because someone from the business sector challenged me because I said, you know, carbon taxation is really, really important because carbon taxation is a way of putting a price on carbon so everybody reacts. It affects the bottom line of businesses and people have to pay attention to it. They said, well, we're just going to move our manufacturing to somewhere where there's no carbon tax. Good luck with that. So this is a map of places that have carbon tax implemented or emission trading systems implemented or both implemented or are thinking about it or developing it. See, Indonesia's there now. Vietnam is there now. Those that want to avoid carbon tax or emission trading have got very few places to run. It's going to cost you money. Any business needs to think about this. What is the cost of carbon in their business? Because at the moment, say, take the Singapore example, our carbon tax only hits certain sectors and certain big polluters, but it's slowly starting to filter down. Eventually, it will hit every sector, and the price is only going up. There's not going to be any way. Carbon is going to cost you money. So you have to drag yourself along with this. I remember I gave a talk in Hong Kong many, many years ago where I said exactly the same thing. Carbon's going to cost you money. This is 17 years ago. And no one was paying any attention. No one was nodding. Until I said, just think about if you've got a cooling system and you suddenly have to make it 2 degrees cooler because all of a sudden it's 2 degrees warmer all across the year on average. How much is that going to cost you per square foot? And I could see one gentleman in the audience starting to do the sums in his head. And that was 17 years ago. I wonder if he actually did anything. This is the way that governments are going to make you do something. because pulling on heartstrings and giving very emotional speeches, my director at the Earth Observatory of Singapore likes to give very emotional speeches, doesn't work anymore. Appealing to people about their children's health in the future doesn't work anymore. It's going to cost you money. That works. And people are going to be watching. People have a much greater social conscience when it comes to climate change. They want to know whether a product is sustainable. And that's only going to increase as well. So you've got taxation and people power. Let's talk sectors. How long have I got, Matt? 5. Let's talk about sectors. The building sector. If you think about it, no matter where you cut it, the building sector has a huge contribution to carbon dioxide emissions. Their carbon footprint is big. Okay? There are things to do. The numbers are big. 27% building operations, 6%, 7%. What can you do? Well, there's plenty of things you can do, and you're going to talk about them today, I assume, right? How do you decarbonize? Well, low carbon materials and recycling. You're sitting in a low carbon building, a wooden building. Some call it the wooden box. It's a big box. It's wood. It's made of carbon. Sequesters carbon. It's a carbon neutral building. Implementing energy efficient manufacturing processes. I'm going to talk a little bit about steel and cement. And then the idea of carbon capture and storage technologies that are not these grand plans of sucking carbon out of the atmosphere in the middle of the ocean or something like that in individual buildings. These are new opportunities. Here's another one of our sustainable buildings. This is the Wave at NTU. As we move forward, there's going to be more increased emphasis on things like environmental product declarations and life cycle assessments, particularly across buildings and in the textiles sector. And so that's why I've put this one in, because that's something that's going to be fundamental to both industries. This idea of understanding life cycle assessments and supply chains and how it rattles through the carbon footprint of all the materials used in building or retrofitting. The steel industry. I was fascinated to hear that China's made moves only in the last couple of days for no new steel plants. And a big effort to retrofit old steel plants with old technology to new technology to significantly reduce the carbon footprint. Green steel, I think, coming from a scientist, is going to be a pivotal innovation. It's making steel with lower carbon footprint. Reduce the carbon emissions of steel in construction industries. And it won't be long before big developers and big contractors, because I know several of them, even here in Singapore, are discussing this already, start demanding that a certain percentage of the steel used in a project has to be green steel. These discussions are ongoing, so it will happen. So here's an opportunity for construction industry to get in early and start making a big difference. The clicker has a little delay. It really likes steel. And I don't know what I'm clicking at. All right, let's talk about the textiles. Now, believe it or not, before I got fat and bald, I used to be a professional surfer. And I worked for a surfing company called Billabong. And way back in the 90s, when I was surfing, they already had this program to try and make their shirts more sustainable. They wanted to make things out of recycled plastics. They wanted to make things out of recycled materials, recycled fabrics. Now, it was a screaming failure, but at least they tried. And then I went off into academia and I don't surf anymore. And that's why I got fat, not to do with the balding. But the textile sector has a lot to contribute. And there's some fundamental changes afoot in the textile sector that you can see. And it was interesting, when I was given the brief to talk about this, I'm quite happy talking about building construction because I've done that before, but I hadn't talked about the textile sector for a long time. So it's a bit of an experiment, okay? So if I'm out of bounds, please let me know after. although you do have a chance of getting the flu if you come to talk to me. I pulled out a couple of plots, okay? So this is from the International Labour Organization. I think they have reasonable credibility, but I don't think it matters how you count this. A lot of the garment value chain is in the phases of fiber production, yarn production, fabric production, treatment, dyeing, and finishing. I've seen a lot of, well, not a lot, but I've seen some commentary saying that, one of our biggest contributors is distribution and transport of products. In the textiles industry, from what I can gather, and these papers are a little bit old, but I don't think it's changed that much since then, we're talking about at least half of the carbon emissions coming before you put it on a truck to send it anywhere. And so this is where a lot of the effort can go. And then the idea of the end of life, recycling things is a great idea, but what sort of contribution is it going to make to carbon emissions? Probably not that much. A lot of it has to be in the production. And my favorite shirt is a bamboo shirt. I like it because it's sustainable. I'm the director of a sustainable education center. I like to, walk the talk. I don't have a car. Students are quite surprised when they see me on the bus outside MBS. And I like this idea that we can move towards more sustainable fabrics. And yeah, I know, I have to argue with NTU every time we order bamboo t-shirts. I see Andrew Krupa's in the room, he has the same argument. We put out say we're gonna make a run of t-shirts, we're gonna make a run of polo shirts. We order the bamboo one, and the finance people come back and say it's more expensive than the cotton one. And then we have to fight. But it's a worthy fight, because we need to move towards these sustainable materials. It's a big difference. And I like this as well from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I looked, the other day I was going to Korea, and so when I leave Singapore, I finally stop wearing shorts and I put on my jeans. And I've had my jeans for 20 years. And I was really interested in this. I spent hours reading this, and my wife walked past when I was making this slide. She said, "What on earth are you looking at?" And I said, "Well, it's about making jeans better and more sustainable." And I thought it was really cool. So I thought I'd just take that one little example as an example that you could use as a discussion point this afternoon. Because it's not just jeans, it's all the things that we use. I try and use my clothes until they're dead. That's why I don't look very fashionable. But supply chain decarbonization is not something that's new to the industry. As I dug into this over the last couple of weeks, I was quite surprised to see the number of people that are involved in the Fashion Pact, the number of organizations that have already signed up, that are making fundamental steps in this way. And one of the things I always say to the students is, at the other end of campus, some of them who are interested not only in science and entrepreneurship, is take the opportunity to learn from other businesses. Don't copy other businesses, but learn from other businesses. Why have these people all signed up? Why have these businesses all signed up for the Fashion Pact? Is it because of social pressure? Is it because of pressure from their market? Is it pressure from their board and their investors? It's interesting to think about the underlying reasons why people get involved in these. And so I think this is one of the things I just wanted to pick up. It's a good collaboration between suppliers to move towards low carbon technologies. And so I think I just put that in there because I want people to think about options for learning from other people in the industry. I know it's a competitive industry. Building is also a competitive industry, but you still can learn from each other. And it's good to see workshops like this and roundtables and panel discussions for people to exchange ideas. So what's my summary here? Well, at NTU, we're trying to, walk the talk, right? We're trying to actually deliver on sustainability. Sustainability in education, sustainability in technology, and sustainable buildings. And so this one just across the road here, our Hive building, another one of our sustainable buildings. Feel free to go and have a look at it. by embracing this innovation and this push towards cleaner technologies and clean energy, there's a real opportunity for businesses across all different sectors. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that there are very clear sectorial differences. Differences between the building industry and the textiles industry. But there are some very clear commonalities as well. In terms of technology, in terms of policy, in terms of drive from the social side of things. And so understanding that's really important. It's one of the reasons that in the Climate Transformation Program at EOS, we have a huge sustainability and humanities program, because the humanities plays a huge role in this anymore. It's not so much about science. It's mostly about technology, about policy, and about social science. And that's how we make change. So with that, I'm going to leave it there. If you're not doing anything on the 3rd of October, okay, CFIL, my center, with the help of our friends at Mapletree, are bringing Thomas Heatherwick to NTU. Now, who is Thomas Heatherwick? I hope some of you know. Thomas Heatherwick is the designer of the Hive and various other things. So if you're willing, please see if you can sign up. I think Matri is here somewhere. She told me this morning that there was 120 people registered already, so you might want to be quick. Okay, with that, thank you very much.
Okay, as we gear up for the first of 2 panel discussions today, allow me to very quickly scope the problem. The building sector accounts for approximately 37% of global CO2 emissions, with ASEAN being one of the faster growing in the regions. Now, what we have also realized is that for the building sector, it starts from the design, where the embodied and operational carbon dioxide emissions matter the most. So some previous research has been performed for the residential sectors in Europe, and these are the numbers that you see on the screen in front of you. You would realize almost immediately how much of these would cost to actually retrofit existing buildings with greener technologies, amounting to from anywhere between 25 to 75% of their GDP, which is a significant amount of money. Now, what can be done? Here are a few identified existing solutions, and it starts at the very top. From design leadership, where there is a clear mandate from the senior leaders in an organization to set clear and achievable goals, to then moving down the supply chain to ensure that you procure and you use low carbon materials. Following that, you then have low emission construction, where the blocks are modularized and scalable so that you can transport them with ease to the site where it's eventually assembled. Now, once you have your building up, then how do you integrate, or how do the buildings coexist in a central cooling system design, where you can leverage on the effective cooling measures that are in place? Last but not least, and something that's equally significant, is of course retrofitting. And we see an increase in these one-stop shops in providing solutions to, or retrofitting solutions that allows you to reduce your operational carbon dioxide emissions through HVAC, which is your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, as well as your automation and control. A good example would be the lights that you now have in most toilets in Gaia, where they are controlled by the motion sensors. Now, these solutions aren't without some challenges or obstacles, and I would like to quickly highlight 4. The first of which is economics. And as how Prof. Switzer alluded to earlier, it's about the money, correct? How do you finance this? So this incremental cost for retrofitting is not so palatable to some developers, and the cost passed through to the tenants is not well established. Next, you have, or rather the lack of, actionable energy audits is something that has proved to be a key tool that can be used to drive change. The third is Knowledge gaps, perfect. So knowledge gaps, both from a management point of view in setting these clear goals that I spoke about earlier, as well as all the way down to the operationalization of these. So the skill sets for these workers to actually know how to integrate these new technologies into the existing technical know-how that they already have. And the last obstacle that we have identified is the readiness of the grid. Now, renewable energy operates very differently from most energy sources that we are now very used to in power generation, AC to DC, and this involves a significant investment in this infrastructure, and this is also something that is lacking in this region. However, like how Prof. Switzer again mentioned, there's always hope. So these are some recommendations that the panel will be speaking about later, but allow me to very quickly just touch them on what they are. So they cover things like your regulatory recommendations, your incentives, which include how you can support these new building materials, all the way to the compulsory energy audits that can drive and move change, focusing on poorer performing buildings to see how you can scope the problem and then provide viable solutions. Last but not least, I think what's very important is driving this partnership. I think a collaborative partnership between the landlords and the tenants is instrumental in moving the needle when it comes to decarbonizing the operational carbon for buildings. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for the first panel on buildings, Mr. Timothy Goh from Decarb. He will be joined by 4 esteemed panelists, Mr. Sam Nun, who is the Business Development Manager at Reset Carbon, Ms. Yvonne Huang, who is the Lead Representative in Asia for GRESB, Mr. Ho Chi Kit, who is the Senior Director and Chief Engineer at C&W Services, and last but not least, Prof. Tan Ming Chen, who is the Director at HP NTU Digital Manufacturing Joint Lab from the School of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. Please put your hands together and give them a round of applause.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here this afternoon and to be moderating this panel. I had a call with them yesterday, and I'm really excited to kind of be involved and to share kind of their knowledge with you. I guess maybe I should do a quick introduction. My name is Timothy Goh. I'm a partner at Decarb. I head up the sustainable finance practice. Questions? Okay. Yeah, sorry. And I'm going to introduce my panelists because you're not here to listen about me. Sam is one of the leads for the real estate practice at Reset Carbon, Asia's largest pure-play decarbonization consultant. He has a background in construction and was formerly North Asia Head of Sustainability at Hilti Group. His key focus areas at Reset are embodied carbon reduction and tenant engagement. We also have Yvonne. Yvonne is the lead representative of GRESB in Asia. Her mandate is to encourage real estate and infrastructure companies in Asia to participate in the GRESB assessment. GRESB is an investor-led green scorecard provider that offers actionable ESG insights for institutional investors, banks, and corporates to aid their decision-making throughout the investment cycle. Yvonne is a seasoned company director with extensive board governance experience, and formerly a director at CapitaLand. She now holds multiple board positions in addition to a GRESB role. We also have Chikit. Chikit is a senior director at Cushman & Wakefield, leading the sustainability and net zero carbon assets technical consultancy in the Asia Pacific. He focuses on optimizing asset performance, reducing costs, and aligning carbon reduction target with corporate goals. With a strong background in engineering and sustainability, Chikit is also an educator and published author in various academic conferences. He holds advanced degrees and certifications in engineering and energy management and business continuity. And last but definitely not least, Prof. Tan. Prof. Tan is from the School of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, NTU. He was up to recently the Program Director of Building and Construction at the Singapore Centre of 3D Printing, and currently the Director of the HP NTU Digital Manufacturing Corporate Lab. Since 2019, he has been on the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Advanced Manufacturing and Value Chains. He is listed as a global shaker for his pioneering work on concrete 3D printing. Clicker, could you bring back the recommendations? So we're just going to bring it back to recommendations because I think we want to get the panelists' thoughts on each of the various recommendations. I think maybe I'll kind of start off with Sam. He wants to talk to us a little bit about the green leasing framework, kind of the landlord-tenant, not conflict, but the issues that arise from the recommendation.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tim. So I think let's talk a bit about landlord-tenant engagement. I think if we look at the operational footprint of a building, particularly a commercial building, you've got basically two buckets you can separate the emissions into, right? So you've got what comes from the shared services, which is your elevators, your HVAC. You've got then everything that is actually under control of the tenants. So that can be things like the lighting and basically if they've got individual heating, cooling, refrigeration in their sites. Now, one of the big challenges that a lot of people are finding in the industry is that there's a bit of a miscommunication right now between if you're a tenant, how do you start to talk to your landlord about sustainability initiatives? If you're a landlord, how do you actually get your tenants involved to help you to reach your carbon target? So there's a couple of issues that are big ones at the moment in the industry. I'll talk about those, the issues first. I think the first is that people are struggling to actually talk to the right people. They're struggling to find the right contact. So if you're a landlord, you want to talk to your tenant, typically you only know the person who's responsible for that lease. And actually the same thing happens if you're a tenant. You know the leasing team at the landlord, and quite honestly, you're normally in a pretty adversarial relationship because you're trying to get as much rent out of them as you can. So that's obviously not something that's really conducive to sustainability. So what we see in the rest of the world that is really now a new working model is the green leasing model. And there's been an attempt to do that in Asia. A lot of developers have now got green lease programs, but they're still not working perfectly because there's still a fundamental disconnect that the wrong people are talking to each other. So if we look in Asia, the first thing to do on tenant engagement is make sure that the sustainability teams are involved with the leasing discussions, and that actually during the course of your lease, you have a sustainability contact as a tenant that you can reach out to and talk to about your sustainability related initiatives. The other thing is that not every tenant is going to have a sustainability goal, right? So if you're going and telling people sustainability terms need to be within their lease, that's going to scare a lot of people off because maybe they've never thought about this. They're a smaller business. This seems like a lot of work. It seems like a lot of cost. So how do you engage those people? Well, you need a simpler program as well. So the other thing that is being seen around the world are simpler engagement models, which are focusing on things like a very small, kind of low effort certification to get your tenants on board and give them some useful data. It might be maybe you give your tenants you have an agreement with your tenants on providing energy data, you'll share the energy data, but then you provide them with a benchmark compared to the other people in the building so they can see actually whether they have opportunities to optimize their energy performance and reduce costs. So I think with the tenant engagement point, it's really important that we start to think about this as really a bit more nuanced than just providing a green lease and hoping people sign up. We need to really think about what types of tenants do we have, what are they struggling with, and how as a landlord can you actually meet your tenants' expectations there.
Great, thanks very much, Sam. And I think one of the interesting points you raised was on kind of certifications, and I guess it's a good chance for Yvonne to maybe weigh in on what you're seeing on this space.
Thank you, Tim. First of all, I would like to say a big thank you to NTU. This is like an oasis. I've been in Singapore 26 years. I'm from another NTU, National Taiwan University Business School as well. And wow, I never imagined a campus can look like this. And another secret is that I'm actually an intern referral to join GRASB. So when my daughter was back in uni, she did an internship, and I was in Capital Land at that time and wondering, how we can head towards a more green and sustainable buildings. And buildings do fascinate me because each building is like a person. We're all unique. Even identical twins are not identical. You look at KL, the Twin Towers, depending on how they receive the sunlight, maybe their solar panels will have different efficiency level. And they all have different stories, how they can go on retrofit journey. Or ASEAN, as we know, the next 1,000 babies will be born in Africa, India, and ASEAN. And they all need a place to live, work, learn, and play. And how can they live in greener buildings will determine how, as Prof. Simba said, viable humanity. And human civilization are built around water and ports, so we all have water issues and physical risks and so on. So how do we sort of incredible useful context and lay that back to the lens of green lease and green certification? In addition to commercial sector, investors love data centers and warehouses these days. And warehouses being, it's not hospital or hospitality that need to be 24/7 lights on. So when it comes to their UN PRI pledge, so if you think about the financial institution, GIC and NBIM, the sovereign wealth funds and many other pension funds, who manages our future, right, our CPF and our future generations' future, they need to make sure that money continues to grow, but in terms of there's a Venn diagram crossover between values and valuations. Because while we want to be green, we also need our pension funds. So they are all looking at reducing their financial emission to net zero as well, and that puts pressure, hopefully, on the building sectors to perform. So they like warehouses, but they also like data centers, which, I find green data centers an interesting concept. But the good news is, if you look at the sustainability maturity curve, there are very aggressive tenants out there, like the hyperscalers, the Amazons, and so on. They are actually the force of pushing data centers to be net zero, and a lot of them are morphed into renewable energy developers. So as Professor said, there's money to be made, right? With every crisis, there comes opportunities as well. And in terms of green certification, the genesis of GRESB, for those who are not familiar, we were actually a university project in the Netherlands. So there were 3 pension funds in Europe, and Netherlands, small country like Singapore, they are not going to have their own standards. They're going to have an international standard and play with everyone. So they might invest in, say, Germany, there's Passive House. In UK, there's BREEAM. In Singapore, there's BCA Green Mark. And how do you know whose building cert is light green and who is dark green? They need a translator, and GRESB was born. And so we went from 3 investors backing us to currently we're an investor-led organization with more than 150 institutional investors, and the collective AUM is over $50 trillion. So talking about using your wallet to vote, but it's not like they don't have their pressures as well, they do. So to give you an example of APG, they want to be net zero by 2040, and China's goal, for example, is carbon neutral, 2060. But they say if the project is willing to come on board with them, they are still willing to invest. So I think, again, with a combination of policy and financial incentives, and with data transparency and harmonized green cert, we do have a shot at this. Sorry for hugging the mic, but I can talk to Councilman Wen's buildings.
No, thanks. That's really good insight, Yvonne. And maybe I'll pass the mic now to CK and see, I know there's some nuances and sectorial differences, but maybe you can tease it out.
Yeah. So I think in terms of how Singapore has decarbonized since 2005, where green mark was first introduced by BCA, I think today, if you look at the progress we have made since 2005, we are actually achieving numerous buildings that are 80% more efficient than we were in 2005. So these are primarily the more learned owners and investors in the likes of CapitaLand, Keppel, who has really transformed the landscape in Singapore, whereby if you look at the central business district of Singapore, you look at all the grade A buildings like Capital Green, Capital Sky, the Keppel-owned buildings, they are primarily all super low or green mark platinum. So we call them grade A buildings, whereby they are the prime estate. Okay? But there is also buildings that are so-called left behind, whereby they have failed to transform, and we call them grade B buildings or grade C buildings, although there's no clear definition on how do we define grade B or grade C, but primarily these are buildings that doesn't have a very good large footprint, whereby you are not space efficient, you are dated in your facilities, and henceforth you are not able to get the grade A tenants that are able to pay you good rents. And there's a study done by Cushman & Wakefield and many other research institutes that green buildings actually command 10% premium in terms of rental. So this actually makes business sense for you to green your buildings. So anyway, we always say money talks. Okay? So money really talks to us in three ways. So in terms of how we measure whether a building asset is effective, is efficient, we actually look at the net property income, whereby the first way the money talks to you is that the net property income is making money. Your P&L is good. And because you have good net property income, it gives you the ability to talk to a banker so that you can actually get liquidity, you can get leverage to borrow money to finance your green initiatives. Okay, so that's the second way that money talks to you. And the third way that money talks to you is that if you have a portfolio of building whereby your net property income is actually showing very good results, you attract equity, you attract investors. And this is primarily how the ecosystems will have a vicious cycle to continue to decarbonize in a very positive way. So my challenge is really with the grade B or grade C building owners that they are really, their building structure would give them a lot of challenges in terms of the financial aspect, the payback period. And they also don't enjoy the economies of scale like CapitaLand, whereby they have large footprint. So they are something like the middle class or the sandwich class of the asset owners, where they don't fit in the most ideal position. Yeah. So helping this group of asset owners decarbonize are the major challenge in this 15 years or 20 years of journey since Green Mark was introduced in 2005. And that's the last 30% of the buildings in Singapore. They are struggling to decarbonize. Yeah, maybe I'll stop here.
Thanks. I mean, I guess that's why there's collective sales and tear it down and rebuild. But maybe I'll pass the time now to maybe Sam to also kind of share the Hong Kong experience with this retrofitting the older buildings there.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's a huge issue. I fully echo CK's point. I think we also have an issue in general in Asia, particularly in sort of high-rise, high-concentration cities, that land is at a real premium. So often it makes a lot more financial sense to knock down one of these old B and C buildings and build something new. We also don't build for a long time, right? A lot of buildings are built with an operating life of 30 to 50 years. So I think there's a huge issue regionally, actually, with this. I mean, when it comes to retrofits, I think actually at the moment there's a need, I think, to just make it clear what the business case is for retrofit. What we're seeing a lot of clients starting to work on in Hong Kong now is mapping what we call a marginal abatement cost curve. And what this basically means is that you take a lot of data from various retrofits that have been done, and you can actually attach a cost per kilo of carbon abated, right? And you can actually kind of, spread that across the investment lifetime, factor in how long you actually, how long you've got left on your carbon target, and you can understand per kilo reduced, what is sort of the cheapest option. And so to me, that's what makes sense, right? Is that if you actually can start to generate transparency on these numbers for people, first of all, retrofit actually starts to make a lot more sense. Immediately people think, when they think retrofit right now, about things like chiller upgrades. We've actually seen that in a lot of buildings in Hong Kong, chiller upgrades are now one of the most expensive things you can do because everybody's been focusing on chiller upgrades, so they've all got really efficient chillers. So you can't get that transparency without the numbers. So I think that's something that to me is now super important, is that particularly real estate owners, landlords, now start actually developing these kind of curves. What this also really helps with, if you're the sustainability head, you can go to the CFO and you can speak their language to them, right? You can say, here is a map of exactly what it's going to cost. I can give you this many savings over the next 5 years, but from years 5 to 10, I'm going to need an investment from you, and they can start to plan that. So I think that would sort of be my recommendation if we're talking about retrofit, is let's start really attaching numbers to this stuff. The techniques to model it already exist. There's a huge amount of data in the market. It's just really about people sort of being aware of this and starting to do the calculations.
Yep. Totally agree. So here I'm going to pivot and go somewhere interesting. I'm not sure they are prepared for it, but one of the recommendations was to expand innovative subsidies for green materials, passive buildings, and modular construction. So I'm going to go panelist by panelist and say, if you had carte blanche, where would you, or do you have an innovative subsidy that will move the needle that you think can be implemented?
I'll give you a stab. So coming back to ASEAN, because climate risk is like, we're all in this all together. We can't diversify from climate risk. And it's having the same set of rules is like Euro Cup football game, but we are playing at very different pitches. Maybe some of our neighbors in ASEAN are playing in mud pitches without shoes, and some of us are playing at Astro. So we can't really say whose experience can be applicable. However, there's not stopping us for applying by the same rule and take one step towards the right direction. And so I would say, we have retrofit experts here, so I will probably focus on the dual track effort. We also need to focus on the new build. And now we have a real chance. China's steel industry seems to be really transforming. They produce 53% of steel. I know Swire Group in Shanghai actually imports steel from Turkey, so they can future-proof their embodied carbon, because they're foreseeing how financial sectors might reward them this way. So we are actually taking a group of Chinese delegation to visit Sweden. They have one of the most advanced net zero steel called H2 steel up in the Arctic Circle. So we want to suss out. So these hard to abate industry are really hard to move. So I think after we've done energy transition, which is the operational carbon, we will have to face the elephant in the room, which is steel and cement. The supply chain is complex and so on. So as that slide shows, we need your academia brain power, and we need a policy, we need the money, both from equity and bank side. So I think from subsidy point of view, currently there's already sustainability linked loans, green loans, but I think at the end of the day, someone will have to pay for the bill. We need more transition finance. The company won't be able to move by themselves just purely out of goodwill. And we are all in this together, and I think everyone needs to kind of dip into their pocket and then get their share at the right time to make this all work together. So
I'd maybe jump on that point, because I think it's what you say about reaching into the pocket is really key. I mean, I can again give some Hong Kong experience, but we in Hong Kong have now 10 of the largest property developers, all with a science-based target. Now, every single one of those will need to address low carbon materials if they want to have any hope of reaching short or long-term targets. The thing is that discussion hasn't really sort of hit the boardroom yet in a lot of cases, and so the financial impact of that hasn't really been felt. I think you're absolutely right. People need to reach into their pocket, and the leaders will have to, because it's really an economies of scale topic on materials. In terms of innovative materials, one other thing that I have seen recently, actually, which I think is really interesting, though, is book and claim models, where basically, if you are one of those who is reaching into your pocket to basically buy a lot of this material, or be one of the first to buy large volumes, you can actually create a certificate from that you can then sell to somebody else who's maybe in a different geography where the materials are not available yet, that they can actually attribute to their own decarbonisation effort. I mean, there are these models basically where you can sort of share the cost impact, but I don't think those are going to be the fix. I don't think we should rely on those. It has to be really, if you have a science-based target, you need to realize that is a financial obligation, and it's something that you need to be prepared to, you know, save money in some places, as we've said, with energy efficiency, but then you'll probably have to spend money in other places. But it is going to be short-term, because once we achieve economies of scale on things like low-carbon cement, the costs are going to come down because there won't be a market for high-carbon cement anymore.
Yeah, I mean the strategy for a low-carbon building is primarily very similar. You apply smart materials, green construction, passive, active strategies, overlay with smart controls and renewables. But I think right now, we, as engineers, I think we need some help and incentive in terms of subsidies, in terms of grants, to be able to explore the frontier of how we cleverly integrate different technologies, different solutions together. So take, for example, in the net energy zero building for DBS. I think that was achieved in 2022, whereby a 35-year-old building in Singapore, four-story high, 55,000 square feet, we have managed to turn this 35-year-old building, brown building, into a net energy zero building, which means that it generates more renewable energy than it actually uses. So that as becomes a net energy, primarily this really show proof that existing buildings, if we cleverly put our engineering skills and lay them out nicely, so that technologies are not standalone, but integrated. So in the sense that there's no point buying the most efficient chiller if your pumps, your cooling towers, your fan coil units are not smartly controlled. Yeah. So don't spend money on buying the best equipment. Spend money on how you cleverly manage your equipment so that they perform well together as a system, not as individual equipment. So it's the same as engaging the tenants. There's no point having the best crafted plan if the stakeholders don't buy in. So that means that landlord, your tenants, your facility managers, your subcontractors, everybody must embrace the same vision of having a low carbon approach to your supply, your operation and maintenance. Yeah. So this is what we are advocating today. How do we create a more integrated and effective ecosystem?
Could I quickly jump in? So thank you, CK. Cushman is a very good partner of GRASP as well. You know, was a business student, still interested in CapEx. So as he said, it's really no point to go for the most expensive and fancy toy because it's, you know, at the end of the day, it has its payback period. So what I like about the GRASP Green Scorecard is that it's like your personalized health check. And once you go on this health check, it gives you a spider diagram and compare to 5 like for like. So it's a bit like, you know, there's no point of benchmarking my health checkup with a 20-year-old's, you know, cardio and metabolism rate and so on. So we benchmark brown with brown, green with green, and see how they perform. And then you can see your average score of 5 other peers, how they are performing. So you are not investing too ahead of a time or falling behind. And also you can identify opportunities where there's the lowest hanging fruit and where it takes, you know, boardroom approval and much longer, and when is your CapEx injection. So it's a bit like a steering tool for you to make those decisions. Real estate is a very capital intensive industry. You need to understand your equity and debt financing. So having a tool like that really helps.
Thanks very much, Yvonne. I think now is a good time, I guess, when we talk about materials a little bit. You talked about green building, that maybe Prof. Tan can share with us his work on modular construction and 3D printing of cement and how it's a carbon capture solution.
Thanks. I was wondering where I was going to come in.
Yeah, here you go.
I'm from just across the hill, Nanyang Hill, and School of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. I actually am a metallurgist, but 10 years ago I embarked on this journey on 3D construction printing. So it was a bit of a pie in the sky doing 3D printing construction. And I thought that it was an opportunity to change everything, revolutionize the energy equation, and actually build smarter, build safer, and build clever. So I got, as a typical academic, I had slides, half an hour talk, and I cut it down to by half, so I got about 10 slides here. So just introduce a few technologies here. Yeah, if you can look at the top two figures, they are the Fullerton building, built in 1924 to 1928. Typical, lots of formwork, steel bars around. And then at the bottom, we have the construction of the Arc, which is on the other side of the hill in NTU. Hasn't changed. Lots of steel bars, a lot of workers on site, very dangerous circumstances, subject to rain and the heat, and actually a lot of fatalities. So during, I think 2017, there was a stop work order for 1 month because a worker died on site. So the stop work order. So things hasn't changed over 100 years. So it was a chance when we did 3D printing to revolutionize the way things are being done. So if you look at a car industry, you don't, I mean, from the Ford factory line to current factory lines, I've been to Renault, I've been to Nissan, no workers on the factory line, totally automated, hardly any. I went to the new Hyundai EV in Singapore. There was just a few workers just checking, making the machines and the robots are behaving themselves, but hardly one or two on the shop floor. So everything has been revolutionized in the industrial revolution, except the building and construction industry. So good reason there, construction, hardly any productivity over the last 50, 60 years, right? And the reason being, it's much cheaper to hire workers than to automate the industry, right? This is an article from The Economist, and because there are boom-bust cycles, so in a bust cycle, it's easier to retrench all the workers, send them back to their home. So that's the business model for the industry. Likewise, much more different for the car manufacturing and even the agriculture industry, where a lot of science and digitalization has actually improved productivity. So if you look at the idea of 3D printing, which came about 20 years ago, it actually revolutionized manufacturing. You look at the designs, I shouldn't be pointing, but you look at the three designs, solid, shell, and design for additive manufacturing, you spend less time, less weight, less material, and when you compare that to a bureau or agency, a lot cheaper if you do 3D printing. So that is the basis of 3D printing in construction. So for example, a bridge, the bridge actually consists a lot of members which are actually non-weight bearing. So if you remove all the non-weight bearing members, the weight of bridge can be very light. Likewise in other manufactured products. So for building and construction, this came from the World Economic Forum. The idea is to actually build less and build clever, right? Build less, there's a lot of growth cities in China, as you know, especially northern China. And the key takeaway there is that you have to look beyond making money. You need better planning, build clever. So the other project which I have been involved with is this Simba-Best project actually in the NUS, the Create Labs, where they have come up with technologies whereby you use less air conditioning, less lighting when there's no one around. So for example, if you enter a building on a Saturday or Sunday, you don't switch on the lights for the whole building and air conditioning for the whole room. The light and the air conditioning follows you. And we've got sensors now to monitor this. It's like better use of energy rather than heating up the whole building or cooling up the whole building or lighting up the whole building. It follows you. So the technology is there. We can harness that to build smarter. So when we talk about net zero in buildings, we're not just talking about energy. We're talking about zero emissions, zero fatalities. A lot of injuries are happening on the work sites, so we're trying to eliminate errors. A good example is the Berlin airport, which was, if you follow the Berlin airport, I was there, they said it's going to be completed next year. And I think 5 years later, it was still being in construction, right? A lot of errors. I think there was like 10,000 building errors which needs to be corrected. And the cost overruns were like 2 or 3 times the original plan budget. So it's trying to build clever and trying to build smart and build with low energy. So what we did in 3D printing is we try to use waste material. We use fly ash residue from steel plants and actually use them as cement substitutes. So we finished a low-cost Indian toilet using fly ash as cement substitutes. So less cement, less carbon footprint. We also use recycled glass from bottle containers. So if you know glass is actually SiO2, they can be sand substitutes. So we ground them the right size and actually use them as 3D printed stools there at the bottom. Subsequently, we built a bathroom, okay, which is actually for high-rise, where you can slot them in modularly. So this again is totally 3D printed in 9 hours, it says there. And the idea is that all the parts can be done modularly, because the toilet is the bathroom is the most complicated part of the building. There's sewerage, there's water, there's electrical, and it delays the completion. So the idea is to build them off-site and slot into the high-rise. So these are some of our achievements. And the last one, which I want to mention, is concrete is very unusual that it actually can sequestrate carbon. So not only the CO2 can be sequestrated, it speeds up the hardening of the concrete, speeds up and actually hardens it by about 50% higher strength. So this one is a work in progress. We are hoping to have some press release on this. Actually, we managed to sequestrate more CO2 in 3D printed concrete than just normal cast concrete. So the idea is that if there's a carbon tax, there also could be carbon credits for buildings that sequestrate CO2. And we're talking about currently we've got about 2% of the weight of the building that we can sequestrate with CO2. So that can translate to a lot of money when you look at the amount of concrete that's being used in most buildings. So that's the last slide, and it's time for tea break. Thank you.
I don't know if it's time for a tea break yet, but that's a really amazing development. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but I think it's really exciting. So now I think we have a few minutes for Q&A. Do we have? Okay, so it's an open mic, or you can send your question to that QR code.
Hi, my name is Rahul. Very nice discussion, very good panel. I have a question about carbon pricing, and this was raised earlier as well. There was a beautiful map that came up, and there was some white areas and some blue areas, some red areas. So we obviously know that there is a carbon arbitrage that is happening. Some countries charge more, some countries charge less. And where I'm going with this is, like, when you talk about the sources of that carbon pollution that is there in the atmosphere, it's largely fossil fuel. And whether you buy 1 barrel of oil from North Korea or North Carolina, it's the same price. But when it comes to carbon pricing, we do not have a uniform price globally. So unless you have that, you will have this kind of arbitrage where companies will simply shift. It's like labor arbitrage. Companies will simply shift. So is there any consensus, or is anybody globally thinking about engaging bodies which can, market forces will not be able to do it, because every country will argue that, okay, my competitiveness comes down, so I don't want to do it, by and large. So how can we deal with that? Because the planet is one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can take that one. I think what we're seeing now around the world are what called border adjustment mechanisms. So you see, for example, in the EU, they've got something called the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And basically what that means is that if you as an importer to the EU are bringing in a product from a country that has a lower carbon tax or a lower cost of carbon, however they charge it, you're forced to pay a top-up at the import, right? So basically your effective price is the same as if you were buying that product in the EU. That's something that is affecting 6 industries so far. So it's concrete, steel, fertilizer, hydrogen, energy, and aluminium, I think. And that's something that is first of its kind around the world, but now there's, I think, 5 or 6 other jurisdictions that are putting in similar border adjustment mechanisms. So the UK is considering it, I think California is considering it, Australia, and maybe a few others. I think it remains to be seen how effective these are. With the EU one, there has been a lot of issues with rollout. Honestly, for people, for example, sourcing steel in China, it's almost impossible for them to get a number, actually, that they can really trust of what is really the footprint of that steel that they've bought. So there's a lot of questions still about actually how can we ensure the data is accurate? How can we actually, really trace back where this is coming from? So I think there are efforts to do it. I think policy-wise, it's certainly seen as sort of a combination. I mean, some people are seeing it as protectionist, some people are seeing it as kind of a carbon measure, so I think it's still fairly controversial. But there are some efforts. I think in terms of just the actual kind of enforceability, there's a few things to iron out, but certainly we're seeing that globally now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really a problem, and you've rightly identified that every country has their own prerogatives. And I don't think there is a way they can get full consensus. I guess what we're trying to do, or with kind of the COPs and the Paris Agreement, is everyone has to agree to a net zero. So I think an academic study done in Chicago once was that the correct price of carbon should be, I think, 280 or something, and no country is remotely close to what it needs to be. So I think if everyone kind of honors their goals, then somehow, some way, it needs to get there, and I guess that's the only way to do it. I don't think anyone would hamper their own industry, or you can make a global body that will enforce a global carbon tax in the near future, at least. Time for one more question.
Thanks for the panel discussion. Actually, quite interesting topic always when we come to the decarbonization. But even in Singapore, and nowadays we are talking more on the embodied carbon footprint of the building. But for the decarbonization in Singapore is very advanced. We work over the decades on the operational carbon reduction and become a mandatory already for the public buildings. With green gold requirement, we have to be a super low energy building, must be a super low energy building. But why we are a bit delay, or we are not having any regulation on the embodied carbon yet in Singapore? But we have the calculator, but we talk quite a lot on the embodied carbon, and then already we have few timber building in Singapore. But in terms of the regulation or like a green mark, even there is, the green mark is giving more important for the embodied carbon, the new one, but it's not mandatory yet. Is there any reason behind that, why we are a bit delayed in this to implement compared to the Nordics? They're very advanced, and then it's like for the building permit, they must submit the calculations. But here so far, no, just for the scoring only.
I see Yvonne is ready. Go, Yvonne.
I'll jump on this one. Yeah, indeed, Singapore has done an amazing job in operational carbon reduction with all our prop tech and sensors, and really way to go. When I was Capital Land, there was a fish tank. We can literally see the entire portfolio. If a warehouse door is left open in Bangalore, we would know it in Singapore because the charts start beeping. But when it comes to embodied carbon, and if Singapore were to reach our 2050 goal, retrofit and decarb is such an important pathway because we're a highly urbanized city. So very different story with India, lots of new build, and you could build them differently. So the problem with the hurdle is that Singapore steel could come from Japan, Korea, Turkey, China, and those are really hard to abate industry. It depends on that country's policy and intention to move that industry. And there are only 2 provinces in China without steel factory. Basically, there's a massive overcapacity. They have more than 500 steel factories in China, produce 53% of world steel. So they're basically just waiting for each other to go belly up. And but at the present moment, there were some forward companies, because the EV and so on, they build low carbon steel, and they just start announcing EPDs January this year. So as you mentioned, the data transparency, you have to have bankable data that you can trust to start with. So I would give a really kind of irresponsible answer. It's kind of out of our hand, right? Like, in a way, yes, Singapore does have intention to do good, but we also need to face the reality that it's quite a big fish to fry, and it takes more stakeholders. You basically need all hands on deck. You need the policy, private capital, people activism, philanthropic capital, and trying to move this. It needs a game changer, and for cement industry as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks for your answer. But my question is, I mean, to set the benchmark, maybe yes, we need to wait for the industry to balance for the EPDs and all this. But to mandatory to give the industry or the consumer must submit that embodied carbon calculations. I mean, we don't want to set the benchmark. I know we are not ready in Asia yet. But at least we have the calculator already for the embodied carbon, SGBC. And also we have the carbon calculator for the MEP system. Even in Europe, it's very basic for the calculation on the MEP system is not that level yet. But Singapore is very advanced. We already have the calculator. But it's not made mandatory yet.
So I think that's a interesting and fair question. I don't think it's above any of our pay grades here to decide government policy or law. I think that I think it's probably in the works. I mean, obviously I'm speaking out of turn here, but if you look at Singapore's legislative history, we do kind of study what other countries do, where people mess up, where people have done well, and we come up with our own laws. So, for example, we look at the plastic bag charge. Only very recently have we made it kind of into law to charge for that 5 cents. It's not that Singapore doesn't care, but they have done. I mean, when I spoke to the policymakers then, they said, look, we have done the scientific study. Literally, it does not make a difference in Singapore whether we charge that 5 cents or not charge that 5 cents. The only reason we made that charge is because we want to send an educational policy shift to say that this is what we need to do to reduce waste. But from a practical perspective, it did nothing for Singapore from that kind of decarbonization perspective. So that's kind of why they did that. But to answer your question as to whether it will be made mandatory, I do foresee that it will be at some point in time. But they probably need to calibrate it to make sure that they get it right. And that's kind of Singapore for you. They want to make sure they get it right. Thanks. All right, thank you. I think my time is up. So if you put your hands together and thank my wonderful panelists.
Thank you for that very insightful panel discussion. The time now is 3:15, and there is coffee waiting for us outside. Let's take a 15-minute coffee break, and we'll resume back here at 3:30. See you in a bit.